Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Stanford University Human Centered Artificial Intelligence Weekly Seminar. I'm Lucy Bernholtz, the Director of the Digital Civil Society Lab at Stanford, and I'm delighted to be hosting this conversation. Before we get started, I want to remind everyone that you can join the conversation by going to the HAI event website and click on the big link that says join the conversation in order to submit a question for Elizabeth. So without further ado, let me get us started. I'm going to begin by introducing Elizabeth. She will do her presentation and we'll have plenty of time for questions toward the end of the hour. So Elizabeth Adams is a non-resident fellow at the Digital Civil Society Lab and the Center for Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity at Stanford. Elizabeth is a technology integrator who works at the intersection of cybersecurity, AI ethics, and AI governance, focused specifically on ethical tech design. She impacts the world around her every day by serving as a member of the IEEE Global Initiative on Ethics of Autonomous and Intelligent Systems, helping to build global standards for AI nudging and emotion AI, and as an appointed member of the Racial Equity Community Advisory Committee for the City of Minneapolis, influencing the local civic tech and tech design racial equity conversation and framework. Elizabeth, I'm delighted to be here. I'm looking forward to the presentation. Take us away.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
And can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
All right. So thank you so much, Lucy. I am so honored to be here with everyone, with you and everyone who took the time to join us today. I want to thank the Institute for Human-Centered AI, the Digital Civil Society, and the Center for Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity. As Lucy mentioned, I'm Elizabeth Adams. I currently reside and work in the Minneapolis area. When I was invited to share the work of my fellowship project, I thought long and hard about what I wanted to share and how best I could convey this work. And there was no way I could just talk about the activities and the meetings and the progress and the checklist without having a human-centered discussion around the background of why this work is so important to me and how I've been influenced by my own family. So for me, the best way to humanize AI is to first humanize the conversation. And I love this quote by Brian Bracking because it's the basis for the work that I do in AI ethics, and tech transparency. And after spending a couple of years talking with data scientists and engineers and a ton of folks around algorithmic bias, I learned that many scientists and architects and even those who are teaching code simply are not aware of the stories of those who are impacted by biased technology. They're not aware of the generations of leaders whose stories have still yet to be told, and those who have been on the front lines advocating for vulnerable populations and communities of color, whose stories should be preserved and told truthfully. This is why I added, the best way to humanize a conversation is for us to tell our stories. I curated this presentation to represent two main themes: legacy and leadership, and modern day. And for this portion, I will cover 4 generations of Black leaders in my family here in Minnesota who have worked on behalf of vulnerable populations and their community, advocating for real racial equity, equality, and while facing barriers of their own. But my family's story is just one of millions of other stories where Black Americans have bravely led through some of the most trying times in our country's history. So let's get started. This is my great-great-grandfather, William Godet. In 1885, he became the first Black firefighter in Minnesota. During that time, as a community leader, there was a man named Fred McGee. He convinced the mayor of St. Paul to hire Black firefighters. My great-grandfather served for 2 years as the only Black firefighter enduring many racial hardships. It wasn't until 1887 that additional Black firefighters were hired. My great-great-grandfather rose through the ranks and was put in charge of 2 Black firehouses. He retired to captain in 1926 after having served 41 years. He led during times of great discrimination and bias. The men were required to serve and fight fires in many areas of the city where they were not welcomed or wanted. And as a way to recognize my grandfather's leadership, my great-great-grandfather's leadership, his endurance and bravery, the St. Paul Fire Department has named their headquarters after my great-great-grandfather, William Gildett, and his brother, Alfred, who was, killed in the line of duty. And we as a family are very proud to have documented these records of their achievements and their pioneering leadership efforts. William Gildett had 3 children, and my great-grandmother, Nora, was influenced by her father's work. And like many Black Americans at that time, William Gildett worked very hard to be a pillar in the community, all while working in an environment where he faced harsh racism, discrimination, exclusion, and prejudice. Yet he wanted his family to realize the American dream. He wanted his family to participate in as meaningful activities as possible. He was adamant that we as Black folks, if anything, help pave the way for others and help erase the stigma that Black folks weren't capable, educated, or couldn't be contributing members of society. One particular example of his resolve for inclusion happened in 1916 when he and my great-grandmother entered a dog competition at the Minnesota State Fair. These records are from the final State Fair report in 1916 and show that William and Nora took 2nd and 3rd place in the Chesapeake Bay dog competition. As mentioned, my great-grandmother was influenced by my great-great-grandfather and was involved in and sought to serve with the women in the community and continue to build a life for herself and her family. She married my great-grandfather, Fred McCracken, in 1910, and my grandmother was born in 1912, Rebecca. My great-grandfather, there's so much to cover in my legacy, and I'm so proud of that. My great-grandfather, Fred McCracken, arrived in St. Paul in the 1900s. He became a pillar of the community almost instantly. He is listed over 50 times in various newspapers from 1909 to 1950 for a number of courageous leadership roles. As you can see, he has done a number of excellent leadership from 1909 to 1925. Once he left the DC area after serving as a private secretary, he became really involved in St. Paul, helping to eliminate and eradicate racism. He was extremely vocal and he was engaged and skillful in speaking the truth to elected officials, while at the same time using his influence to create opportunities for other community leaders. He believed he had a calling to help the Black community organize, and he did so. Fred McCracken was a founding member of the Sterling Club in St. Paul, Minnesota, which was incorporated in 1919, and he was elected president in 1925. Due to discrimination, there were few places Black people could go to entertain and socialize. But this was more than a social club, as the members created a haven from racial and economic discrimination and worked to solicit camaraderie within the African-American community. My grandfather, Hayward Toussaint, and my grandmother, Rebecca McCracken Toussaint, were members for years, and my grandmother was a part of the Women's Auxiliary Group. During the Great Depression and World War II, the women created cabaret-style events to help earn extra income to keep the clubhouse afloat. Club members had influence with legislators in Minnesota as well. They often met with them to discuss equal rights. And in 1943, the Minnesota Senate passed equal rights legislation bearing discrimination based on religion and national origin. The Sterling Club's influence was a huge reason for the passing of this bill. Throughout the 40s and the 50s, the woman's role remained pivotal to the community, creating opportunities to sharing parenting for sharing parenting tasks and taking turns watching each other's children so that everyone in the community could participate. This brings me to my father and my mother. My father was born in a small town in Mississippi. His name was James Adams. And when he was a young man, there were many weeks he worked as a young man in Mississippi for free, or he would receive a quarter at the end of the week. He and his brothers would pool their earnings to help the family buy food and other essentials. He entered the military and to escape racism and to have a chance at life. And he is a Korean War veteran. He and his 5 brothers all served in the Army. And just like the generation before, he endured great discrimination on home soil. Interesting enough, he shared how much he loved Germany. He said the people were very friendly. He retired from the St. Paul City Public Works, where he helped start the union. And my parents were married in 1956. My mother was instrumental in the community. She was influenced by the stories my father shared of his life in Mississippi, as well as the stories from her own family. She ran a newspaper from our home, and she wanted to give business owners an opportunity to advertise in a paper closer to home. The larger St. Paul newspaper cost more for advertising, and being citywide, most subscribers at the time would not be coming into the predominantly Black community to shop. She also wanted to share news from our community. She was extremely vocal activist, and she wanted to be on the front lines of change. And as a mother of 7 children, 6 boys and 1 girl, and a wife, she found a way to be present for all as well as her community. My mother ran for Senate, for the state representative, and she lost, but it didn't stop her from pursuing other important goals. My mother had a dream of building a recreation center for the children in the neighborhood. She would go to the mayor's office every day and tell him, our children need a place to play. She connected with the North Central Voters League to help. A local effort emerged in St. Paul of grassroots activism, primarily from the working class backgrounds. And as a volunteer organization, it involved itself in voter registration campaigns and also confronting city elected officials over their responsibilities to its residents. They were a big help to my mother. And while it took years for her to finally meet her goal, here I am breaking ground of the Oxford Community Recreation Center with the St. Paul mayor at the time, Mayor Brine. This was the first urban renewal project of its kind and demonstrated a great civic and community partnership, elected officials working together with community to deliver services based on community input. My mother was killed in an auto accident when I was 6 years old. She left 7 children behind, me and my 6 brothers. And my father worked 3 jobs to take care of us, and he modeled a true measure of a man. He was a leader in our home. I'm very proud of this picture of 4 generations of women who have led in their own generation a number of community organizing activities. My grandfather took an interest in me after my mother died and began to involve me in social activities such as political fundraisers. Here I am with one with Vice President Hubert Humphrey and his wife Muriel. And yes, my grandfather was adamant that I participate in Girl Scouts and that I learn to play the piano and attend fundraisers. He also wanted me to be aware that as a young Black girl, that if I ever wanted to have a chance in life, that I needed to participate in certain events. He used me to some degree to push for inclusion in a number of circles. And as I learned from other relatives, he wanted to change the narrative for how people viewed Black people. He wanted us to be seen in a positive light. I want to pause here for a quick reflection and honor the lives of those who have come before us in all of our families. There are many unsung, unknown heroes who have dedicated their lives in a large and small way to bring about fair and equitable outcomes for all. Their sacrifice and resolve to want more for their communities must be told. And my hope is that AI will find a way to preserve these stories intact with the proper narratives of Black Americans, Black Minnesotans who have for centuries tried to find a way to enjoy life and help their communities thrive. And what I hope you took away from the legacy and leadership section is that stories matter. Stories help us influence our path and our way in life and our decisions as well. And as we move into modern day, remember this about Black Minnesotans. And Black Americans, we have always had to vacillate between enjoying life through social clubs, churches, trips to the lake, wanting to participate with our family in a number of ways, to living in a parallel reality of fighting for justice, equality, equity at every stage and every generation. So here's the part where I tell you a little bit about my technology background. We're moving to modern day, and thank you for allowing me to share that part of legacy and leadership. As Lucy mentioned, I'm a technologist. So I've been in technology for about 20 years, and I've spent most of my leadership career in the Washington, D.C. area, leading a number of large initiatives for Fortune 500 companies. I also spent time running a systems integration lab for the Department of Defense, leading a team of 200 technologists, including software developers, engineers, architects, modeling and simulation scientists, as well as statisticians. I returned back to Minnesota in 2018, woefully unprepared for the huge racial disparities in employment, education, housing, and the legal system, and quite honestly, the level of disregard for Black voices and Black opinions. It felt like, in many ways, the needs of Black people were invisible. And this was not the same city that I left in 1997. So as a technologist with my eye on the future, I wanted to help. So I sought a way to get involved. And the way that I chose to get involved was through the city's Racial Equity Community Advisory Committee. And prior to my arrival back to Minnesota, the Minneapolis City Council adopted the Racial Equity Community Framework and created a division of race and equity. And also in 2017, at the end, they adopted and created the Racial Equity Community Advisory Board. I was appointed in May of 2019, and on my application, I indicated a desire to participate in this group by bringing technology considerations for transparency into the city's racial equity framework. And by the time my fellowship was awarded in December of 2019, I had spent several months learning and observing and ready to get to work on what this would look like and working on drafting policies and principles around transparent tech. I was learning civic tech. So this is interesting. There's a trend happening on Twitter now where people show where they started and they show where they are. So for me, this is where I started with my fellowship, a vision for a more transparent city, one that protects vulnerable populations and communities of color. And over 100 years later, Black families and people of color are still working to protect vulnerable populations and communities of color. Each generation leading in a way that the current generation is called to do. And for me, it's technology. So right after Fellowship Week this year in 2020, I began to meet with various elected officials and other committees to begin this work. And through this recommendation, or through this work, through the recommendation of Council Member Fletcher, he suggested that I connect with some individuals who had a similar interest, which I did around March, right around the time that COVID hit. So in May of 2020, a group of us formed our coalition, and we've met just about every week. Most of us are volunteers working on a part-time basis on an effort that we feel very, very passionate about. We decided to call our coalition PostMe. PostMe stands for Public Oversight of Surveillance Technology and Military Equipment. PostMe MN is based on the ACLU's nationwide CCOPS effort, Community Control Over Police Surveillance. We wanted to push for transparent technology, and we wanted to build upon the momentum of the Minneapolis's data privacy principles that were adopted in February of 2020 to serve as momentum. And we drafted our PostMe ordinances to be specific to Minneapolis based on three things: feedback from adjacent cities who were also pursuing a measure such as this, to be inclusive of as many surveillance technologies that we knew were being used, and to incorporate feedback from council members, city staff, appointees, commissions, and of course, the community. Our ordinances are a living document. So why PostMe? The community in Minneapolis is pushing for more police accountability, simply put. And in Minneapolis, growing demands for police accountability followed the brutal murder of George Floyd. PostMe would provide Minneapolis lawmakers and the public a meaningful way to understand and oversee decisions about the city's acquisition and use of surveillance technologies. By passing our draft ordinances, we are asking for productive conversation on the front end rather than reacting to the next headline. And there is little disagreement with most citizens in Minneapolis that we want to keep our city safe. So we are hoping that Minneapolis will be the next city to adopt transparency, oversight, and accountability and equity in its use of surveillance technology. Here are a few post-me surveillance technology examples that we have included in our draft ordinances. Computer vision, which includes facial recognition technology, gait recognition, as well as license plate readers. And of course, location tracking. And one big consideration I will highlight for location tracking is the Amazon Ring camera. There are over 1,000 police departments that have contracts with Amazon Ring, which means they have access to more data which can be used for surveillance. Amazon is also helping law enforcement talk to communities about opting in to give law enforcement access to this data. And it's one way that law enforcement can get around getting warrants. But I want to highlight an additional consideration that we have included in our ordinances, and that is energy consumption and smart grid surveillance. Through our research, we have learned that there is a growing number of landlords and other interested persons who are requesting or desire to track a renter's movement by energy consumption. And we are learning they believe that this data will help them determine if there are more people living in a particular unit than on the lease. This is why we've included this as part of our surveillance in our ordinances as well. And here in Minneapolis, we are advocating for a ban on facial recognition technology, and I'll cover a little bit more of that in the next slide. So this slide highlights the timeline associated with the Civic Tech project, an effort where government and city are working together to find a solution for a community need. And I covered already mostly the first and second quarter pieces, but what happened in third quarter that is significant is that Councilmember Fletcher introduced our original draft ordinances with all of those surveillance considerations that I mentioned on July 17th. It was approved unanimously by the Minneapolis City Council to move to committee. And what that meant and means is that the ordinances have made their way through city staff, and we have met with the city attorney, the city clerk, the CIO, a number of commissions, a number of appointees, and elected officials to begin to flesh out what does it mean, understanding some of the definitions around surveillance. What would it mean from a level of effort for the staff? We realized through this that there had been an uptick in crime in Minneapolis after the George Floyd murder. And while we initially had a lot of support by these different groups, with the uptick in crime, there now was a little concern about moving so fast in this space. And so a decision was made for us to pull out facial recognition technology considerations and move that into a separate ordinance. And on October 2nd, Councilmember Fletcher introduced new ordinances that specifically talk about a ban on facial recognition. And we are now moving that to committee. Same process happens, which is it will make its way around city government to get an understanding of what the definitions mean, getting buy-in and agreement before it comes back to the city council for approval. And we are hoping that those ordinances will be adopted by the end of this year. So I want to say that I have been working in partnership with a number of brilliant social civic leaders throughout this fellowship. No one can do this work alone. As I mentioned, many are volunteers working on a part-time basis, all committed and concerned to making sure that our community is safe. And I'm honored to be working with them alongside of them. We decided to take our conversation to the community. And so we are hosting a town hall on the 22nd. We have a couple of national leaders that have been working in this space at the ACLU. Councilmember Fletcher is a part of this and will be joining, as well as I and a number of other coalition partners, as a way for us to help the public understand what it means in Minneapolis for police to be using surveillance technology, and so that we can continue this education process. And finally, before I close, I just want to highlight one more slide, and I want to briefly call your attention to this tech insertion process that I developed as part of my fellowship work and research. One of the questions I kept asking myself all year in all of these meetings and working with so many brilliant people and talking with people all over the world is this: how can technology be used to help communities thrive, specifically BIPOC communities, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities? And in my days of running a tech insertion process for the government, I remember the main goal of bringing in technology into our environment was to help keep individuals safe. If the technology does not help keep individuals safe, we will not spend time integrating it, and it cannot be used in our suite of tools to deliver technology solutions. So I developed this model in a similar vein. So I developed it as a litmus test to really begin to ask the question: does technology, once it's adopted into our community or even before, does it help us get to thriving? And if we start at level 6 and make our way up, each one of the groups within level 2 to 5 are actors, so to speak, helping to uncover and eliminate racism. And if we can bring technology into their space to help our communities thrive, then it's something that we should take, we should be considerate of. So I'm hoping to explore this a little further with coders and those that are teaching coding. So if anyone is interested, please connect with me afterwards. I'd love to have this conversation with you further. And with that, I'd like to say thank you. This is a lake. I live across this lake. It's Lake Bede-Makaska. And I hope that you all can see that my leadership path to public oversight of surveillance technology, it did not start with my fellowship. It started generations ago, built upon the experiences of family members and others who have fought for fair and equitable outcomes, all while trying to enjoy this thing called life. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. What an extraordinary story. And
Thank you.
State of Minnesota has been lucky to have your family. I've got a couple of questions queued up from the audience, and I want to encourage additional people to add additional questions. You can do that using the QR code, or you can go to the Submit Questions button on the HAI event page. But let's get started with one, an observation and a question from me. First of all, I find it really quite powerful to go back 3, 4, 5 generations and situate this work in that context. And so I wonder if you could share for the audience your thoughts on recognizing that the pursuit of equity is not just there's no short-term fix. There's no lifetime fix, apparently. There's generational work. And so for coders and AI experts and people thinking about the tools that they're building, how can they actually make that that truth practical to themselves? How do they make that part of their work?
Well, you know what, Lucy, that's a great question. And I think events like this are helpful as people begin to learn that there's history behind folks that kind of show up to the initial conversations about transparent technology, that we have to give ourselves space and time to discuss those stories. Many times when I show up to an event to talk about why this work is important, people tend to think that I'm showing up based on some recent event. And they want to start the conversation there. And what I have found, Lucy, is that if people don't believe that that recent event was valid, let's just say the murdering of a Black American, if they think that there was something else that that person could have done, then we really don't have a basis for having authentic conversation that spans generations, because they think I'm showing up based on that event, and I'm actually not. I'm showing up because I have a lived experience. I've experienced racism and prejudice and discrimination. So part of it is educating. We have to keep telling people that there's a larger story here. It's generations. People have been trying to do this work for centuries. And for Black Americans, we don't get a generation off. I don't know one generation that has gotten a generation off from dealing with this. And so it would be helpful if we could begin to just have truthful, authentic conversations. And one of the things that we are starting to do at my organization, Thomson Reuters, is we are doing something called 10,000 coffees. And we are taking the labels off. We're not talking about mentors and VPs and, data scientists. We are meeting for a half an hour and we are just getting to know each other. And that is so helpful to understand someone's story and just having a conversation.
Yeah. I think there's something extraordinarily powerful in reminding white people in particular of, first of all, it shouldn't be your work to remind white people of anything, but for white people who are in these positions to recognize that this isn't reactionary, it's proactive, it's justice oriented, and as you've said, it's generational. So that leads me to another question, which I think people probably realize, but I want to call it out very specifically because I think in my experience around technology and racial equity conversations, there's very much an approach of how do we insert racial equity into technology? And that's not at all what you're talking about here. You are talking about bringing technology into a pursuit of racial equity.
Into the conversation.
Yeah, and that's a significant shift. And I think it's about recognizing different kinds of expertise. It's about recognizing who's setting the table, if you will, and who needs to go to other people's tables, not invite people into their table momentarily. Just thoughts on that.
And I'll add, Lucy, that obviously as a Black woman who's a technologist, I've been in many spaces where I'm the only one. And it has been a constant challenge, I'll say, to figure out the best way to navigate. Because one, if I am sitting here representing a community, I don't want to offend someone because I know that there's a larger goal that we want to get technology advanced. We want it to be able to help communities thrive. And so I know personally, I've endured a lot of, talking over me or people excluding me from certain tables. And I've had to navigate that space very delicately. It is a challenge. It is. And it's not an easy one to kind of show up just like, you and I have talked about in January, when we took that walk, and I want to say thank you for that, because that gave me a chance to kind of really talk about why this work was so important to me. If you see this picture on the lake, I participated in my first regatta last summer over at the lake. That's the kind of stuff I want to do. But unfortunately, even with me wanting to do something like that, it was a challenge. I showed up one day for class and someone asked me if I was lost, not if I needed help, not if they could help me navigate how to get a vest or to get a radio so that I could take the boat out, if I was lost. Right. And so those are the kinds of things that, we're still trying to do work, but we also want to enjoy this thing called life.
Exactly. And I think there's really very practical insight that other people perhaps on the call can reflect on, particularly white people, particularly white technologists, about when and how do they make themselves the only one in the room, and what could they learn from that decentering and recentering of a different kind of expertise. Which does bring me to a question from the audience. I think this is on this topic. Go back to your opening about humanizing AI and telling our stories, and worrying about the disconnect between storytelling and algorithmic processing of data. Other practical or insights or suggestions about how do you integrate them, or as we were just describing, sort of think more about the disconnect, really give people the space to think about the disconnect and between what they're trying to do with these two different sources of wisdom.
So I'm not really sure what the question was. Was it how can we do more integrating of storytelling?
How do you integrate storytelling and algorithmic processing of big data? I'll paraphrase the question.
Well, if I were queen for the day. What I would do, and I would talk to professors or those who are responsible for teaching coding, or even those who are coding, I would bring in someone to have a conversation with your coders. And this is what I talk to people about all the time as we are starting to, again, re-energize around diversity and inclusion efforts. We don't need to build big programs around this. Just bring someone in for a dialogue and pay them for their expertise. Bring someone into your classroom, bring someone into your organization whose life work has been this, and just have them have a dialogue with someone for a half an hour, or even build a process. Maybe they come in monthly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not, to me, it's just not that hard.
Right. But I think practically it does require recentering expertise. There's another question here really about what do you wish technologists were doing that they're currently not doing? And you've made some very clear answers to that. Bring in different kinds of expertise. Get out of your own bubble. Go figure out what it's like, or experience that that discomfort of being the only person like yourself in a setting. Something that in this country I think is very unusual for a lot of well-educated white people with technology. Any other ideas there?
Yeah, so I will tell you, my evolution into civic tech started because I started talking with data scientists, and I found that they were a bit offended by me just asking questions like, are you sure there's no algorithmic bias in your model? Have you thought about the second and third order consequences of your tools getting into society? And people were really concerned that I was challenging their ethics. And I thought, okay, I could spend my time talking to all of these data scientists, or then I could start doing learning events, which I did, which led me to, civic tech work. But I would just say, let's just have a conversation. Let's understand. I mean, I started off, like I said, doing learning events. And to me, I think we need to, again, Lucy, have the conversation, the humanized conversation about people and what they bring and what their lived experiences are like. And I don't know how to help someone that doesn't look like me. I don't know how to make the light bulb go off to say, you know what, we don't have the right people at the table, other than for us to continue having these conversations and pushing that work out in the spaces that we're in.
Right. There's a question here that asks about looking for, you mentioned algorithmic bias. The question is, how do you help tech uncover racism, as you mentioned? And I'm wondering if what your thought on that question is, but even is that the role of technology? I mean, isn't uncovering racism the job of humans?
Well, yeah, but that was part of the reason why I developed the tech insertion process, was because I saw an opportunity. So let's think about it. Technology can be used for lots of different things. It's used to predict the wind on any given day for a sailboat, whether or not it's safe to go sailing. So I developed the tech insertion process just as a quick litmus test of whether or not this technology is helping communities thrive. And if it's not, then we can begin to unpack it to see if there might be some elements of racism that we need to uncover and or eliminate. And it's really the basis of just having that conversation. Does this technology help a community thrive?
Right. Great. Couple of questions here specific to PostMe. So sort of jumping to the oversight. So one question, how do the PostMe ordinances relate to existing city policies and initiatives relating to the use of data and technology? You mentioned the data
privacy.
And are they designed to be complementary, or do they challenge any of those existing policies?
Well, let's think about this. So we haven't been doing this for very long, right? Just a few months. And the data privacy policy principles were passed in February by the city council before we even got involved and started, as a coalition, started having these meetings. So they were designed to be complementary. But the data privacy principles authored by Councilmember Fletcher was really to protect citizens' data. And it has language in there such as Minneapolis will let you know when we're collecting your data, how long we're collecting the data for, what are the uses and what's happening with it. And we thought that that would be a great entry point to start talking about public oversight of surveillance technology. And so they're meant to be complementary. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. And let me go a little bit deeper on this. Oh, I just lost the question. It had to do with the, hold on one second, the police traffic stop data and PostMe. Should, how is PostMe thinking about making that data, police traffic stop data, public? Should the anonymized data be completely open? Is a summary report sufficient? It's a very specific question, and the questioner says they're actually working on it in Iowa City. So you've got some allies and some people to talk to. So let's get into the weeds.
Yes, let's connect. I would love for that. So our initial conversation, and we're still working through it, was really just to have an overarching discussion around all the surveillance technologies. And so that's where we were starting. And once we began our work with the city of Minneapolis, and based on, like I said, the uptick in crime, we've had to kind of narrow our focus. And we felt like the thing that we could handle right now from a city perspective, the way we could educate the community would be around banning facial recognition technology. So we've not gotten as far and as deep into stopping data, if that makes sense. And I hope from the person in Iowa, but I would love to connect afterwards, because we are always looking for partners in adjacent cities to help us understand what work has been done, to help us, kind of reorganize our ordinances and, as well.
Yeah, great. Actually, here's just a thought for me. How many cities do you know of across the country that are working on these issues and talking to each other? Or is there an opportunity to help connect those cities?
I think there is an opportunity to connect. So the last information I got, I think there were 13 cities that had adopted the CCOPS ACLU model bill, and ours is called PostMe. So you have Post New York, and you have some other things. And of course you have some things in Portland. They've just kind of adopted, their facial recognition ban, the most comprehensive. So there are, and we have done, through people in the fellowship, Lucy, I've connected with people in New York and other ways, and other coalition partners have reached out to folks in St. Louis and Oakland and Seattle. So yes, I do think there is an opportunity, and maybe Stanford can host a conference.
Maybe.
That'd be great for all of us to get together. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Let's all talk. Couple more questions. You've got questions flowing in here, so I don't want to get.
I love it. I'm so happy about that.
Could you provide a bit more background on the rationale for a ban on facial recognition and not just a restriction to certain uses?
Oh, okay. So as opposed to, so the ban. Okay. So yes. So for Minneapolis is currently using Clearview AI. And through our research and through information that is public knowledge, there are some questionable things happening with the leadership of Clearview AI. And so that's why we chose specifically not to think about a moratorium, but just ban it. Because we want to, if the city is going to adopt facial recognition technology, we want an opportunity to talk with the vendor, understand, a little bit more about their transparency. There are a couple of companies that might work, but we are not there yet. And so we know from Minneapolis that the one that we're using, the one that's being used, procured by our county, that the city then can use, is Clearview AI, and we want to ban that.
Okay, so that leads right to the next question. From someone saying, do you have any examples of where you or perhaps other municipalities are working with companies building explainable or trustworthy AI? And those are capitalized, so that is just a note, to incorporate the impacts of racial bias on communities from the perspectives of the stakeholders involved.
Ooh, can you repeat that one more time?
Yep. Any examples of where cities are working with companies building explainable or trustworthy AI to incorporate the impacts of racial bias on communities from the perspectives of stakeholders?
That I do not know if there are any cities that are doing that. I know I'm taking that on personally, And as I mentioned, and I won't say the company right now, but there's one particular company that I think has done an amazing job. Their leadership is very, very interested in bringing in the community perspective, talking with their engineers and developers. They have worked very hard to get the proper standards for that. And they have teams that are involved in responsible AI. And this is a facial recognition company. They have made a decision not to sell to law enforcement. So they use it for stadiums and for organizations, companies. So I don't know if there's a city, and if someone else does, if they could please let me know, because those are, again, the kind of partnerships that we want to build upon.
Wonderful, great. There's actually a conference starting later today, and excuse me, I'm going to sneeze, just unfortunately, called the Refusal Conference.
Okay.
And I think we're heading toward this conversation, right? There may be certain applications of certain technologies that if you are thinking of, if your purpose is centered in a racial equity framework, there is no appropriate use. And that hasn't been part of the general conversation, but I think your examples and these questions are leading us there.
Yeah, and actually, Lucy, I want to say, as an individual who's been involved with racial equity work most of my life, except in the DC, it was more around gender equity and pay equity. I want to move away from this conversation of racial equity. I want just technology to help communities thrive, everyone. Right. And that's kind of why I'm pushing for more diverse perspectives at the table. I felt like one way to help the city become more aware of these things was to, like I said, be involved in the Racial Equity Community Advisory Committee, because that was the outlet here. But actually, I would really like to just talk about humans and how we work together and how we can enjoy this thing, as I said, called life.
Life, right.
Yeah.
That may be a transition here to a question about education and actually helping people gather these skills. I'll just read the question as it's written. What would you like educators to know, share, and engage with their K through 12 students in regard to artificial intelligence and machine learning? There's a massive gap between industry expertise and needs, teacher prep programs, and K-12 curriculum.
Well, this question reminds me of, and it's not the questioner's fault, when people say there's a pipeline issue. I know for myself, I have worked with a number of organizations that do education. So when we say there's a gap, there might just be that people don't understand or know who some of these organizations are. And there are a number of them that are on LinkedIn, that are on Twitter. And if people want to engage with me separately, please connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to partner them with these organizations that I know of that build curriculum, that go into the school systems, and they talk with the teachers and they talk with the students to really get them to start understanding early on how technology is influencing our lives.
Great. There's a couple of people here who are actually asking specifically to connect with you. So yes. Elizabeth has just said LinkedIn. I'm happy to do it. Please do. There are questions specifically about, for example, thinking of AI systems that would help us achieve the world as it should be, not as it is.
Amen.
Another man asking for recommendations as a Black male technologist for ways to get engaged. He's seen some things at the UN, but happy to find other opportunities for global work. These are, of course, not national questions.
Well, let me just really say this. When people ask me about getting engaged, I say, follow your curiosity. That's what I did. And I'll just tell you real quickly. So when I came back in June of 2018, I had just experienced a very, racial experience with an organization. Someone had accused me of being on camera doing something I didn't, and they wouldn't use all the tools available to them to prove that it wasn't me. And so when I came back, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do next. And I saw the video, AI, Ain't I a Woman by Joy Bulamwini, and that is how I got involved in this work. So I followed my curiosity. I then wrote a small ebook, just trying to crystallize my message around why this was such a big issue. Then I took it to the community and started having learning events and made my way, back through my own organization. So I would say start there, write an article on something that you're seeing that's global. And when you see these opportunities, I see them on LinkedIn all the time. People are asking for new members to join their boards and their committees to start framing this work. And so I think the opportunities are ample.
Great, wonderful. A couple other specific questions. I want to make sure that if
Yeah.
anybody else has more questions, please share. We have about 10 more minutes, but let me get these in. How do you think technologists can best think about the second and third order level of their work? Any best practices or frameworks to recommend for thinking about those second order consequences?
Well, I actually think, and this is just me, just like in most organizations, you have to go through every year you have to go through security awareness training, right? Like what is phishing email and all this other kind of stuff. I think we need to have AI ethics. And I think people need to understand that their work goes beyond that, just like you do with security. People need to understand what happens when you click on an email from some source that you're unfamiliar with. And the same thing can happen if we have requirements around technology ethics or AI ethics, which is this is what happens when we don't have ethics built into our tech design and the technology makes its way. I know that there are lots of organizations that are starting to create AI ethics principles, and as we mentioned, setting up responsible AI teams, but I think we could go a step further by making it a requirement that people understand it.
Yeah, yeah. Very specific question,
Okay.
going back to your discussion of the work in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
This is a little jarring to insert this question now, but I'm afraid I just saw it, which is
Okay.
you mentioned that after the murder of George Floyd, I think this was the context of this mention, crime went up.
Mm-hmm.
And the question here is why?
Okay, so that's a really, really good question, and I will try and unpack it as best as I can. So after George Floyd, the city council decided that they wanted to dismantle the police department. And in order to dismantle, they wanted to have more advocacy around police oversight. And in order to do that, we have to dismantle the police department because the charter in Minneapolis says you have to do that if you want to change the structure. And that did not get approved by the Minneapolis Police Commission. And there was also, I'm sure people noticed in our nation, there was a lot of police officers who weren't showing up to work or responding to calls. And we've even had that here in Minneapolis. And so from that, there were, and then of course with COVID, Lucy, right? So people are not working. There's a lot of things that are happening in the city that are impacting people's ability to, feed their families. So there was this uptick in crime, and this was happening right when our ordinances were making their way through the city. And so that's when people started asking us different questions and wanting us to have different conversations. And we realized if we were going to continue with the full ordinances intact, that it probably would take till next year. So yeah, I hope that answered the question for the person.
Great, thank you. Very, very helpful. And then actually that leads nicely to this next question, which I think is also picking up on your message of using technology to help humans thrive. How might AI be used to support the repair and reinvestment in housing, education, healthcare at a local or state level in places where in particular communities have been just thoroughly divested in over decades? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I do. And, Lucy, I'm not sure if you know, but I had the intern working on a community response command center research project. And it was based off of how Taiwan handled its pandemic, COVID and before. And part of the reason why they had to do that is other reasons, but they created an epidemic center that brought in society. So anyone who was developing apps, it brought in the healthcare organizations, businesses, to help everyone participate in solutioning the best for the community. And it's one of the reasons why they've been so successful in dealing with COVID. I would love to see something like that in the city of Minneapolis or in other cities where you're bringing in a coordinated effort to deal with these kinds of things that come up. So if we're going to be reactive, so things such as a fire or a flood or another pandemic, but if we're going to be reactive, no, using a dashboard that you would see in these kind of command centers that would tell you where there are some disparities. But again, all of it is around the data. You kind of have to unpack the data and make sure that it's not garbage in, because if you bring garbage in, it's going to be garbage out. So I hope that helped explain that question.
Well, but I think what you're suggesting goes a little bit, I mean, the data, absolutely, not to disagree, but I think the question and what you're suggesting actually is a positive framing for what a city government could be doing for the people who live there, as opposed to providing those resources in a very almost punitive or monitoring or way that's the frame with which we think about how we might use these technologies, as opposed to, as you've been suggesting, stating very clearly for the last hour, how do we use them to thrive? To bring in both different voices and different expertise. I think we got time for one more question, and so if anyone else has one to share, please put it in the queue. But let me ask you about the what's happening in Minneapolis with PostMe and the work you're doing on the Racial Equity Committee. The whole life cycle of technology use by government seems to me to be what you're working on, not just a committee that decides things about how it's deployed, but what's purchased, by whom, for how long, and under what rules, if you will, at the very least. Am I understanding that?
Yep, you are. And what's even more important as we dig a little further is, how can we make sure that the people who are using the technology understand how to use the technology, and so they're not being nudged by these organizations who are selling the tools based on some, false narrative about a community. And so that's part of the challenge too, is making sure that the people who are using the technology, making decisions about how the technology is being used to govern society, that they're not bringing their human bias, and they're not also adding that to the technology that might inherently be nudging them towards that.
That actually sounds to me like an extraordinary opportunity to the participants who are asking questions about education and skills, right? So there's the understanding and the expertise that's necessary on the oversight bodies. There's the understanding and the expertise that's necessary for those who will be then handed this technology, if you will, at their workplace. There's obviously the elements of that goes into creating the technologies. Are there any examples at any scale, city, state, smaller, where you've seen that all being attended to as a piece?
No.
Yeah. No. So that there's an opportunity there. There's a lot of skills and expertise that's necessary, a lot of places where it is needed, a lot of sort of points in the chain where it's needed, but also a lot of different places where it opportunities to provide it to the questioners who are asking about, how do I get involved?
And I think part of the challenge is we're not all living under one mission. That is for every human to thrive. It's, I want my group to thrive, or I want this person to thrive, or these people aren't like us, or this person isn't like us. And so we're not all living under one mission. And that's part of the challenge.
Right. One last question, because I hear this in this context a lot about the kind of expertise that's needed to serve on a commission at the city level, or to be a firefighter who's now being asked to use these different tools, who thinks, I was never trained in this way, all of that. Any examples or advice on reframing this conversation from what strikes me as one kind of expertise is more important than another, to actually your lived expertise, your lived experience of knowing how these systems work is as valuable and as center as knowing how to code in Python. Like,
well, absolutely, because as a technologist, that's what I bring to the table. I'm not a coder, right? But I have a lived experience. And so what I tell people all the time, especially people here in Minnesota that I talk to, we have like 500 open seats for commissions and boards. And I tell people, if your passion is parks and recreations, look to see if there's a seat, but maybe you're also a technologist and you can help them through your lived experience and your work experience become better at being the Parks and Recreations Board and serving the citizens. So yes, to your point, there are so many opportunities for people to participate at the city level, at the state level, at the national level, and at the global level on all of these commissions, boards, and so forth. But bringing your expertise. When I joined my first standards boards, I thought maybe they are going to wonder how many degrees do I have and how many certifications do I have, but that was not it. It was really the conversation. People, I think, want to know more. And especially if you just speak up and say, yeah, this isn't my lived experience. How can we have this conversation? What can we do about it? So yeah, to your point, there's many opportunities to get involved.
Wonderful. Elizabeth, we're right up against the hour. I want to thank you so much for your time, for sharing the generational commitment, and for helping us really reframe the timing of this work. It's not a moment, it's a lifetime, it's many generations, and thank you for all that you do. Thank you to HAI for the opportunity, and thanks to everyone who participated.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Lucy. Thank you, everyone.